All I had was silence, and with the absence of your words, I took it as an answer. By Annie Dot. Chapter 2. Interlude. Shikamaru had been busy, and to be truthful, very unmotivated to do anything. The absence of his father had left a palpable empty space in his life. His mother was bursting into tears every time she sat at the table and saw him take the place his father used to occupy. It took him an embarrassing amount of time to get his shit together. Ino helped, like she always did, and she set an example. She took her new responsibilities in stride without flinching in front of the doubts and the whispers. So eventually, Shikamaru remembered the vow he made to himself and dragged his sorry ass back to the Hokage tower, promising to do his best to make his father and Asuma proud. He knew, the moment he walked in, that something was wrong with Naruto. But alas, they had fought a war. The blonde had assured him it was just lack of sleep, and so Shikamaru took no more notice of the shaggy hair, or the empty eyes, or the dark circles. He did, however, confide in Rokudame-sama that maybe Naruto was stretched just this side of too thin, and he surely deserved a break. Taking some time for himself, figuring out how to live his life as he did before the war, he expected Naruto to react better to the idea. Paperwork was never his favorite pastime. In hindsight, maybe Shikamaru himself hadn't been in the best mindset, because he hadn't thought about how Sasuke had spent an entirety of 36 hours in the city after being released from TNI before finding a mission and leaving. He hadn't thought about how he and Sakura were on the complementary missions in the same region, most probably traveling together. He hadn't thought about how maybe all Naruto needed was to feel useful, even in a tiny way. The weird thing was that after that conversation, which at the time Shikamaru had judged as satisfactory and successful, Naruto disappeared from the face of the earth. No lunches with his friends, no loud laughter on the streets, but everyone was just so busy. Buildings were still under construction, families were still in mourning. There had been a change in leadership, which always meant paperwork on top of paperwork, and then to top it all off, some more paperwork. He and Rokudame-sama worked around the clock for almost 2 weeks before finally implementing Naruto's idea of an inclusive council. Hokage-sama himself sent a note to Naruto, who showed up on time, clean face and nice clothes, but with a haunted look in his eyes. He was the first to sign the document after the Hokage himself, and he smiled at the public and clapped when necessary, and made jokes when they were appropriate, but something was off. Shikamaru just knew. But he was busy. After the official signing, there was another signing under closed doors, and then the actual first meeting, where, strangely enough, Naruto didn't show up. Between all these fundamental changes, Shikamaru had to deal with the fallout of decades of bad decisions from the Sodomine and from Danzo, with the irrational laws Konoha had been operating under, which were so hard to change, with resistance from the older clans, with outrage from Hyuga Hiyashi when he publicly showed his support for Hinata in turning the clan traditions around, with a very unwilling Hokage, and with the new responsibilities of being a clan leader. There were nights during which, even if he had time to sleep, he couldn't, because all he could think of were all the things he had to fix come morning. So when he came into the office one morning after yet another sleepless night, finding the Hokage perched on top of his desk, looking at the monument while deep in thought, Shikamaru prepared himself for yet another problem to add to his to-fix list. "What?" he sighed. Kakashi didn't turn to face him, but his voice betrayed his worry. "Something is going on with Naruto. Something is going on with everybody, Hokage-sama. There's been a war." "Shikamaru." Kakashi turned to look him in the eye. "I fear it might be more than that." "What happened?" he asked, sitting down in his own chair. "He asked me for a mission, and I had to tell him about the council's decision. It didn't go very well." Shikamaru's head dropped in his hands. He'd seen this coming. He had contingency plans. "It's fine. It's normal for him to be upset. I'll give him a couple of days, and I'll invite him out for dinner. If I ever find the time," he thought. They left it at that. Almost a week passed before Shikamaru both remembered and found the time. By that time, he had to admit he was beginning to be a little worried himself. The absence of Blonde was unusual, even if he had been upset. His feet carried him to Naruto's apartment. He could feel his chakra signature inside, but when he knocked, no one answered. Neither the second time. Shikamaru's heart started rabbiting in his chest. He forced the door open. The apartment was dark, but in the shadows he could see the mess. There was broken furniture, dishes all over the kitchen counter, some of them in pieces. The whole apartment was covered in paper. Documents, realized Shikamaru upon a closer look. Confidential, sealed documents. "Naruto," he called cautiously. No one answered. He headed towards the bedroom door. It was slightly opened. When he pushed it further, he could see the lump beneath the blankets on the bed. "Naruto," he called again, softer. The other didn't move. He didn't even give a sign that he had heard Shikamaru. Something was hanging heavily in Shikamaru's stomach as he approached the bed with slow steps. He put an arm where he thought Naruto's shoulder should be. Naruto. Still no sign of recognition. He pulled the blanket off Naruto's head. His eyes were glazed over, like he wasn't really there. Shikamaru's hand shook as he placed 2 fingers on the other's pulse point, but he already knew what he'd find. It was there. Naruto was alive and awake and seemingly unhurt. He crouched down next to his head and asked softly, "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" Naruto looked straight through him. His hands were clenched in the blanket and his eyes were red-rimmed, like after crying for a very long time. Shikamaru felt panic claw at his insides. He wanted to shake the other, to yell and call him an idiot and shove him. Anything to get a response. Naruto opened his mouth, but the sound that came out scared Shikamaru even more than he had already been. It was scratchy from unuse, croaky and hoarse. "It's everywhere." "What's everywhere?" he whispered, voice thick. He never got an answer.